Today on Revert's World, we have our panel discussion once again, where we discuss very important topics that are, as I said, important to reverts or important to those who are contemplating reverting to Islam. And our discussion today is on being a new Muslim in a non-Muslim family, as is the case with many of us when we convert to Islam. And to discuss this very important issue, I have with me once again Sister Amina Inloes. Assalamu alaikum, sister.
Wa alaikum assalam.
For those of you who have not watched the panel discussions in the past and maybe are not familiar with Sister Amina, Sister Amina has a BA in Near Eastern Studies, also MA in Teaching, as well as an MA in Islamic Studies, and inshallah will be embarking on a PhD soon. My second guest for today's discussion is Brother Bilal Ali. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
And again, Brother Bilal Ali has been on the show before as a member of the panel, and as well has given us an insight into his conversion to Islam or reversion into Islam. He has a BA in law, an MA in politics, and is a qualified counsellor, inshallah. So obviously both of our guests are well informed with the viewpoints that they'll be putting forward today, inshallah. So let's discuss this very important topic. And the first question, which is quite an obvious one, is when should somebody who is converting or reverting to Islam actually decide to inform their parents about it? And what factors would influence their decision?
My view would be it depends on the nature of the relationship. I think that's key, because depending on the nature of the relationship, that would inform them when maybe they need to maybe speak to their parents about this in advance, or it'd be that kind of ongoing dialogue that will take place, and they may or may not actually mention the day they intend to take their shahada. They may or not know that's the day they intend to take their shahada. But I think it's something that in a good relationship you'd want to believe that, you know, it's an open dialogue, it's an open forum, as opposed to keeping it secret, which I know some people have had to go through this difficult times when they risk housing issues, basically risk getting thrown out, things like that. So it may be easy to say what should be, but you know, I don't want anybody to watch this and feel compelled to operate in any particular way, but just to consider, you know, all the options and the nature of the relationship they have with their parent, and the kind of dialogue that needs to take place or should take place.
Sure.
That's a very important question, and like Brother Bilal was saying, I think it depends a lot on someone's individual circumstances. Of course, if they're fortunate to have both parents living and with them, it depends a lot on the type of relationship you have, and also how you think they may react. Keeping in mind, oftentimes when we're young, especially if this isn't someone, say, who's 40 or 50 years making this life change, sometimes we don't really fully understand our parents' perspectives, the way they were brought up seeing things, the views of their generation. And with regards to Islam, whether they would consider it sort of a normal and legitimate thing to do in life to become a Muslim, or whether it would just be incredibly, incomprehensibly odd. And I do think nowadays it is less odd than perhaps it was when we were embarking upon this journey. But for many parents, they still haven't realized necessarily that Islam is a growing phenomenon in the West. I do agree that, you know, in cases where you feel there might be some conflict, whether it would be personal harm, for example, you might be kicked out of the house as a teenager or suffer some other harm, or whether it would be emotional harm to the parents also. First of all, I have to say, I don't think there's a rush. Certain things in life are lifetime commitments. Marriage, for example, is a lifetime commitment. So if someone delays a marriage by 3 months or 4 months, you've got the rest of your life, theoretically at least. And religion is also, inshallah, it's a lifetime commitment.
So one should not rush to convert or rush to tell the parents?
Well, I would actually say both. One should be certain, and if and when one has certainty, they should accept Islam. Not, of course, that I have any doubts about the legitimacy of our belief, but simply that one should be committed to the path and not be sort of wishy-washy, especially because it is difficult sometimes for people who come to Islam. It's not necessarily something easy, and life is going to be just a basket of roses. It is a challenge. Allah says He will test us. But what I'm saying is, if one thing I would say, just from my own personal experience, is that a lot of times it is younger people who convert, whether to Islam or another religion. And my experience with parents is they will respect the decisions of an adult child more than of a dependent child. So if you're financially dependent, or you don't have your own family, or they see you in the role of a child, I don't think most parents are going to be as likely to take that seriously as a very mature, adult, well thought out decision. And so, in retrospect, if someone's on the cusp of adulthood, perhaps they're graduating from university, about to get a job, about to get married, it might be worth it just to kind of postpone it a little bit until you're seen as an adult, basically, and you can perhaps
postpone
discussing the conversion.
Okay.
If it's not something you would discuss with your family beforehand.
I don't know, Brother Bilal. Personally, I would have a problem with that. And I don't want to sound too dogmatic, but for one, with regards to the actual time of conversion, obviously, as you said, one needs to be certain, fine. But the thing is, it's not necessarily, in my opinion, about the age of the person who's converting. It's normally to do with the type of mentality of the children. For example, I know of atheist parents whose child has converted at a young age, maybe 15, and because they are open to the fact of religion or no religion, they don't really care, basically.
Okay.
To them, it's not really an issue.
So what you're saying is the nature of the relationship with the child, the type of parents
the
would
type
impact.
the type of parents, the type of ideology of the parents. Obviously, if they're dogmatic atheists, then if a child converts at 15, then there's a problem.
Well, that's what I was saying. It really depends on the relationship. I was speaking of cases where either the child would experience harm or the parents would suffer because of the decision. It's unintentional, of course. We do have to do what we have to do in life. Our responsibility, of course, is to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It said, for example, even Amir al-Mu'mineen, alayhi salam, when the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, he came from the cave of Hira with a revelation. It said that Imam Ali, the very young one, of course, first went home to ask his father permission to accept Islam. And then he came back and he said, why do I need to ask my father? Allah didn't ask my father before creating me. So it's not like we should avoid converting to avoid disturbing our parents if they would be disturbed, but just it needs to be handled well. But there is something else, and that is sometimes you can't keep it a secret. With ladies, for example, there is the issue of the hijab. Now, many times we don't start to wear the hijab right away. We might do other practices, but in my situation, for example, I was a teenager, living in a one-story house. It was kind of obvious that I was getting up and saying Salatul Fajr every morning, running the water taps, not eating during the month of Ramadan. You can't really keep that secret.
Sure.
And it just sort of came out. In my case, it wasn't really a well-thought-out, Mom, Dad, let's have a nice long discussion. Although, now that I think back in that situation, when you are very much a child in your parents' eyes, I'm not quite sure that planning out a good discussion really would have been helpful. But it just depends on circumstances, as you say.
But I would say, but you have to talk. Right? You have to talk to your parents, I think. I as a parent, I think the worst thing would be, all right, now I'm older, as a parent, I'm thinking the worst thing is for your child to be, to make such a big change in their life and you not to know about it. Their friends to know, for their school teacher to know, for whoever they people in the world, but not you. That's hurtful, and I think that's not helpful in the long run. I think that parents may disagree, and may always disagree, or you're gonna have to have that conversation where it's gonna be difficult. But I think just keep it open. That's the best way. Keep the dialogue open. They know. We always see with Islamic pamphlets, and you're always talking about Muslims, or when there's something on the telly about Muslims, and a parent might be saying something, oh, there's those Muslims again, and then the child is saying, no, but you can't really say that because I've been down to them. I think keep it open. Just be open.
Sure.
Well, I think it really depends again on the relationship. I mean, I've met people who came to Islam, for example, whose parents were Hindu priests, proper religious leaders. That's not necessarily a situation where there's really going to be any hope of the parents being being open and accepting about it. To be honest, in my case, my family was not at all open or willing to be accepting at all.
Really?
Or willing to be open about the discussion of Islam, other than why Islam is wrong and this is embarrassing and we have to keep it secret. So, ultimately people do know their relationship with their families well. And one thing, of course, we recognize as we get into adulthood is that the relationship we have with our families is different than others. And I mean, I might perhaps project my experiences on other people, and certainly that's one reason why I'm cautious when people
If we
ask
could just
me these
pick up
things in
on that
person.
particular point, you mentioned that, they may not have disowned you or anything, but they weren't happy and they felt embarrassed about, having a daughter who's a Muslim, How should we react? This is an important point, actually. How should we react when if our parents, or if, again, somebody who's watching, who's contemplating reverting to Islam, and the parents' reaction is quite negative, whether it's aggressive or whatever, they're disapproving.
I know I'm sure there's a lot of that.
Exactly. I mean, how should that child react? Because as you know, when we first react, and I don't mean this to sound disrespectful because some people don't like the word, but I call the phrase the alabaz. You have this desire and zeal because of this religion that you've just, you're now experiencing, and you know how you feel when you first convert.
Sure.
And you get defensive if people start saying things negative about your religion. So you tell your parents, "Oh, mum, dad, I've converted to Islam," and then they turn around and say, "Oh, what have you done? What are the neighbours going to think? X, Y, and Z. What should we do? Tell them that they're condemned to hell?"
No. To think about it. No, I'm only joking. No, I mean, I think that the Prophet, peace be upon him, is an example in that he was patient with people, even people that were not Muslim, even people that were at times adversarial to Islam. I think it's a woman that used to leave spikes and all kind of things, animal guts and intros in the walkway for him to walk. But even still, when she was sick, he went to find out about how she was doing and things like this. So if that's just a stranger, but the example is like a level of kindness, a level of softness, of gentility. So I think that your parents, you love, honor, and respect your parents in an ideal world or in a normal world. But I mean, I know some people have very strained relationships or have very strained upbringing. So I mean, I'm saying it in a context of a kind of regular to and fro of a teenager or a young person at uni or whatever the case may be with their parents. I think that you have to resist that urge to be reactionary. And I have definitely experienced that urge and probably answered to it. So it's just only my advice is maybe something that's a bit more mature now to say, try and be a little, let's say you may say things or in a spirit that you might wish down the road, I wish I didn't actually say that, So I would say just try and adopt patience and just try and be the example. But the reality is that you are human, you are fallible, and you are going to, make decisions which you would wish you wish you didn't after. But try and be patient. But I'm still for the open dialogue. I'm aware of how much harm secrecy and bottling things up and not leaving the doorway open for understanding. Shaitan gets in there and he goes buck wild. He just has a good time because people are not communicating and it's in the unspoken, and then people are misreading sign signals or. So I say keep it open. Even like in a situation where you mentioned that, say for example, somebody that maybe from a Hindu family and it could be quite hostile. If their personal safety is not at risk, I think they have to be the best judge of what they can stand. But I think realistically, it's going to come out. So I would say, just face up as compose yourself. Be aware what's ahead of you, and then take the plunge and just accept the inevitable. They're going to disapprove, they're going to give you a hard time, but if it means, well, I need to finish my exams first, I really can't deal with that stress before I go and talk about it, it's the summer coming, something like that, you may have things coming up or it just doesn't fit within the within your scheme of things, then be wise about it. But I think don't resist.
So in a negative situation where the parents have reacted negatively, what do you think?
Well, I do think physical safety is not the only important thing. Psychological safety is important because you have to remember we don't only convert to Islam in our lives. We do have to go to school, as you mentioned. We have to get a job. We have to be socially functional. And I mean, obviously, in my situation as a dependent girl, until I went off to university at 18, that was 4 years in a house of pretty much daily, I mean, I wasn't beaten for it, but it was basically daily conflict. That was also very hidden, which of course family conflicts are. It's not like I could go and talk to my parent or my friends or my teachers about what was going on because they weren't into Islam either. So it was very challenging. And I was still required to keep things secret because I wasn't allowed to pray in front of relatives or, the fasting as well. We'll just pretend you're going on a diet. So, like I said, if you don't have, not all parents are into an open relationship. Many families are old school, including in the West, children are seen and not heard. We talk to you, you don't talk back to us. And so it just depends on the relationship. And I mean, it may be girls are under different pressures too.
Possibly, I think
there's got to be a gender factor.
There's got to be a gender factor, but also I think it
dynamic.
Depends on the mentality of the parents. I mean, listening to you, the two of you speak, it sounds as though when you're referring to how there should be dialogue between the parents and the child, even prior to conversion, it sounds as though you're obviously inferring from your own experiences, where Sister Amina, who's maybe erring on the side of caution, and maybe in certain situations, again, it's probably down to some personal experience here. So
yeah,
know.
But I think you've maybe pointed to something else, and that is, just as parents have different skills at communication, for example, it is, as you've mentioned, a blessing if people can communicate in any relationship, but realistically, it is a learned skill. We don't all come out of the womb with great interpersonal communication skills. We see it modeled and we pick it up, or we don't. But also, if the child, being younger, is going to be at a certain age in their maturity. Now, in my case, I was not mature in the sense of being able to deal as an adult with emotions and responses and understanding my own responses. And maturity, sometimes, for people, it's a process. Perhaps we're not mature. The hadith say until we're 40. This may be way before the age of 40. And so I think, because when you're asking how to deal with it, with this sense of zeal, it's not as if you're necessarily, the insan al-kamil, the perfect person there, fully mature, fully understanding. Apart from your own, perhaps, life growing that you still have to do, you're going through a very big life change. You've perhaps become very dedicated to a path, committed, but it's not all of a sudden like someone has injected an infusion of all of the Islamic knowledge throughout history in your head so that you can give these reasoned, well thought out answers. You may even be standing up for ideas and values that you think are Islamic, that later on you'll say, no, wait a minute, that really wasn't part of Islam. So you've got the zeal, but you don't always necessarily have the wisdom that comes with it. And when you're going through all that and these big life shifts, it is difficult to necessarily be considered, especially in my case where you feel very much on the defensive, like you have to protect yourself and you're under attack. So as for advice, because you did ask for advice, I would basically break it down into two parts, basically what I've learned and what I would have done differently. One is not to argue. Now you mentioned dialogue. If people are willing to get into dialogue, that's very valuable because that's how you communicate.
Debate,
but once the emotions get up, anger is irrationality, as is said in our hadith. And once someone starts yelling, I mean, even whatever relationship, husband and wife or parents, especially parents, you really just have to let it go and say they might be saying something that's very hurtful to me, very insulting, maybe false perhaps about Muslims or Islam, but they're not going to listen right now. So let's just let things cool off and perhaps pick up later on in a tactful way. And that can be very difficult, especially if you are young, and you have a lot of emotions. But I think that's the wisest advice I've ever heard from anyone. And again, not just with regards to Islam, politics, other things. Don't let the anger come into it.
Sure.
And also, as much as possible, trying to understand why your family or parents may be reacting the way they are. And trying to be empathetic, and even though, of course, we feel that what we are doing is correct and we're not going to stop doing it, to have some compassion. And I mean, I can say honestly, I think it's only since I've gotten into my 30s that I've really begun to understand why my parents reacted the way they did. initially and even long term. And
Yeah.
I definitely didn't have the capacity to do that then. And perhaps it could be helpful, in retrospect, to some people in the same situation if there were people in the community who could perhaps discuss what might be going on to help them kind of deal with it.
Sure. And based on what you've just mentioned, and the reaction of your parents, or again, obviously we're talking in more general terms here, but drawing on our own experiences, would you say that basically what I'm trying to ask, and I'll ask it very directly, I was going to try and beat around the bush, but I won't, and I'm sure you've been asked this question many times before. You've converted.
Yep.
So, are your parents now Muslim?
No, I mean, my parents not Muslim. I haven't converted my parents. I mean, Allah is the one that, makes people Muslim, and I just try to expose what I know about Islam, around the people that I know, not just my parents, but just people in general, in the workplace, wherever. But they haven't converted.
But I guess what I'm trying to get at here is, I'm sure you've been asked this question many a time before. What is it about Muslims that I suppose when you're looking outside the box, if you like, and you hear that somebody's converted, why is it that there's always this assumption that, if you've converted,
I don't understand that.
Your parents, brothers, sisters, uncles, nephews, aunts, whoever has converted as well?
I honestly don't. I'm not understanding that assumption. I don't know what's the origins of that sort of assumption, because I haven't seen too many examples of that. Or when you read books about people that have converted, or you meet different converts or whatever, you listen to lectures and people, Muslim speakers that have come from non-Muslim backgrounds. That's not the common theme, that I went home, I dowed my mum, I dowed my dad, and then my uncle came over, and there are some stories of people saying, I came Muslim, and then my younger brother came, or things of this nature. But I don't really know the origins of that assumption. Sometimes when you hear that question asked, oh my gosh, am I doing something wrong? But I mean, it's not necessarily your responsibility to convert the whole world. Even the Prophet was told by Allah, that you're not the one that makes people Muslim. You just expose this. We just communicate the message. We just like this forum we have now is a beautiful forum that we can just communicate the message, and it lands where it lands, and Allah knows best, really. But we can't. I don't think people should try not to feel pressured by that, because it can make you become a bit self-conscious and start to doubt yourself, like, I am doing something wrong, or what is it that I should be doing? But Islam is it's a beautiful thing, and people who you has ears to hear and eyes to see, they will use what they have, and in time, But what we can hope for is that the more that we expose people that we're around to Islam, is that it's we create a better environment for Muslims to live in, and a better environment of understanding.
Inshallah.
That's what we can really
even if
work towards.
So I guess what you're saying is, even if they do not convert, at least their understanding of Islam will be a lot healthier than it would be prior to you converting.
Yeah. I think when you find yourself like with relatives that will go out their way to prepare halal food, or they make sure this is vegetarian, or things like that, or you're in a family member's home and they say, okay, you can, I know you have to pray, so I've got a room for you, or if they're being considerate of you, that I have a cousin that she's not a Muslim, but one of her siblings is a Muslim, and I went to her house, we was hanging out, and then the issue came up about food. She says, no, I only cook, I only ever cook halal food because I wouldn't want my brother to come and he couldn't eat. I'd feel bad. And he never goes to her house. You know what I mean? Like, never. This was a big gathering, and he didn't even turn up.
That's really
But she
sweet.
would just not, she just always had halal meat in the house, because she wouldn't be able to, it wouldn't feel right for everybody to be eating and he couldn't have something to eat.
Sure.
So just a principle,
I'm about to start crying. That's really touching, mashallah. Well, yes, I mean, one of the things I would say is that, the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we know about the incident of Dhul Ashira, when he invited all of his kinsmen to come accept the message, and all of them, how many? Of course, many, we know in that case there was one, who was Amir al-Mu'mineen, alayhi salam, who had already accepted it, and, I mean, of course, Abu Talib, we know, was very close to the message, but the point is, if he couldn't bring all of his kinsmen on board, and of course some converted basically because they had to during the Fath Mecca, but I don't think you can expect the average person who's not the prophet of God to automatically bring their parents on board. And I suspect probably you'd agree with me on this point that most parents don't want their children to tell them how the world works. And I mean, you can be very kind, you can be very loving, but at the end of the day, you are saying, Mom, Dad, you've taught me some good things in life. You've taught me to use table manners. And,
say please and thank you.
Yes, but basically your worldview and your upbringing and your beliefs are all wrong and mine are right, and there's no question about it. And I don't think any parent wants to hear that from their child. And what was interesting is I was listening to another show on this channel, and mashallah, I'm very impressed with all of the programming. It was one of the teen shows, and they were discussing kind of the reverse issue, being second-generation children of immigrants, and their parents perhaps don't want to hear from them their way of doing things, even though they may feel they're right. But it was interesting to note in that case there was agreement that they should basically let their parents think the way they do and not try to inform them about right and wrong. It's not any different for any parent around the world. I mean, my parents have respect and they have dignity, and again, there may be cases where there's dialogue, but it's not telling your parents, I'm right and you're wrong. And with regards to what you mentioned, parents converting, I mean, the only cases I've ever seen of that, and I'm not saying there aren't other cases, there may be cases when it happens when there's theological discussion, but pretty much it's been when the parents saw the good of Islam long term. By long term, I mean 10, 20, 40 years. Which makes sense because parenting is a long-term process. You don't raise a child in a year or even 10 years. And so just expecting some sort of quick change to impress the parents may or may not work. But when they see, oh, my son or daughter is living a healthy life, is perhaps doing better than their siblings, has a good marriage, has a good family, is a good citizen, those are the cases when I've seen parents say, maybe there is something good to Islam, I'd like to accept this too. I mean, I've even known parents of Muslim children who accepted Islam on their deathbeds, which is very late in life, but just because of this kind of gradually seeing that, well, actually, this is something positive. But like most things in life, it's not instant. And I mean, I guess I do have to say, there's the respect issue. I feel it would be disrespectful to assume that one would tell one parents what to do. Although, of course, we pray for the best for them, and I'm sure most of our parents are good people, regardless of what religion they are.
Inshallah. And in the lovely hadith from Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, where he says, "Kunu lana du'atan bighayri al-sinatikum." In other words, your actions speak louder than your words.
Yeah.
Give da'wah through your actions.
Yeah.
Obviously, we should give it through the words as well, but actions speak louder than the words.
Yeah, that's the strongest da'wah.
I'm sure that our parents...
Yeah, and in other hadith too, a lot of times the concern, I think, is genuine. Are your parents going to be saved from the hellfire? It's worth noting that in our hadith it states that whatever good the child does will go back to the parents and the grandparents.
Of course.
And it doesn't matter whether they were believing Muslims or not, as long as they're not attacking Islam. So it's good to have faith in this, that if we do something good, for the sake of Allah, they will benefit from it regardless of whatever belief they adhere to.
And of course, the reason why we are here today as Muslims is down to our parents, the way in which they brought us up, and the framework of, if you like, good and evil that they'd given us, concepts that they'd given us, maybe helped us to accept Islam or understand, recognize Islam better. Inshallah, when we come back after the break, we can get into this conversation because it's very interesting. Join us soon. Assalamu alaikum.